Okay, welcome back. I already read to you the second half of The Real Christ, including summary so far and everything after that. This is a little bit of a bonus track. I wanted to go ahead and read for you one chapter from the first half of the book. If this interests you, obviously you'll need to go get that book and read that whole first half. It's called The Logos, and the reason why I wanted to put this out there for you is because Bernadette said that unless you understand the Logos, you will never understand Christ. Now, granted, she has perhaps a different meaning of that word Christ than you're familiar with, but if you want to understand her, and if you want to understand what she means by Christ, you need to understand the Logos. So here's 12 pages or so on that. And we remember, of course, that, it starts off right here. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And the Logos became flesh. This is from the prologue to John's Gospel. Jesus did not come down from heaven. It was the Logos becoming incarnate. So everything you hear now, you can think about the man Jesus as you listen to this. The writings of Philo of Alexandria, 25 BC to 50 AD, the Jewish mystic philosopher, were most appreciated by the early Christians, though not, it seems, by his Jewish contemporaries. It was his comparing the Gentile Logos with God's incarnate wisdom, as personified in Jewish scriptures, that was carried forward as the prologue to St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. One wonders how, without the long history of the Logos, 6 centuries, Christianity could have worked out the divine nature of Christ. As an understanding of the Logos is strategic for a true understanding of Christ, nothing could be more important than understanding the historical origin and meaning of the word Logos. As it came to be understood by the Fathers, any reference to the divine Christ was a reference to the Logos. Paul, the earliest Christian writer, does not use the term Logos for the divinity of Christ. Instead, he refers to the divine Christ as the, quote, Spirit made visible. Spirit being understood according to the Judaic use of the term. Until the end of the 1st century, or until John's Gospel appeared, it was Judaism's understanding of the Spirit that was taken to be the divine Christ, and not the Logos. Although Paul was familiar with the Stoics' understanding of Logos, yet, like Philo, he regarded the Logos as only comparable to God's divine Spirit. Wisdom, as understood in Judaism. It seems Philo himself was not totally clear as to the real distinctions between God's Spirit and God's wisdom, or Logos. Thus, his biblical references could be understood as referring to either one or both. For Paul, it was much the same. His understanding of spirit in Judaism and Logos in philosophy could be understood interchangeably as references to the divinity of Christ, the form of God, the sum of creation, or Spirit made visible, etc. Basically, this is why it took another 2 centuries before the two, Logos and Spirit, were acknowledged as distinct hypostases of the Trinity, as stated in Nicaea and Chalcedon. So this is why the earliest fathers, taking their cue from Paul, based their Christologies on the Spirit as the divinity of Christ, whereas later, after John's Gospel appeared, around 100 or so, the divinity of Christ was based on an understanding of the Logos. Thus, it was the Logos that became the orthodox understanding of Christ's divinity. To my knowledge, none of the fathers used the term wisdom in place of Logos for their understanding of the Incarnation. Possibly, this was because it is more difficult to grasp how wisdom, or God's own knowing, could take on flesh, whereas the philosophical understanding of a cosmic Logos was ripe for an understanding of the Incarnation. This being the case, it is important to understand not only what Logos meant to the philosophers, but its understanding as used by the Fathers in their formulation of the Trinity and subsequent Christologies. Without this understanding, it is unlikely anyone can grasp the true nature of the Trinity and the incarnation of the Logos. So let us give some background to this particular understanding of what was meant by the term Logos. The 5th century BC has been regarded as an axial period in the history of man. Overlooked in this axial lineup, however, is the revelation of the Logos. Far more profound and enduring than anything left to us during this period, the Logos is one of God's trifold revelations of itself to mankind. Heraclitus of Ephesus, 535 to 475 BCE, is credited with making the Logos known. Considering its impact and enduring legacy to philosophy and religion, there is no reason to doubt it was a product of divine revelation. Heraclitus was not actually a philosopher or someone who happened to stumble upon a good idea. Rather, he believed himself privy to a truth about man and nature that mere intellectual investigation, reason, could not discover or comprehend on its own. He claimed he alone was awake and knew the truth, while everyone else was asleep. He claimed he knew everything, and the rest of mankind nothing. He would say, "Listen not to me, but to the Logos. It is wise to agree that all things are one." Just about this axial period, you can read more about that in Armstrong's book, Karen Armstrong. And I just learned the other day that astronomers have gone back and have found that 3 of the outer planets, I'm not saying I agree with astronomy, but 3 of the outer planets were aligned as no time before and no time since during this axial period, just FYI. Back to the text. Heraclitus regarded everything in existence as impermanent, changeable, in flux. Yet, the principal cause, or what determined the nature of this flux, was the Logos. The Logos was the reason for being. It resided in all things and in all human beings. It literally made things what they are. The Logos was existence in itself, the purposive source that regulates all physical processes, animates all life, the source of all human law. It was the law of nature itself. Immanent and active in all reality, the Logos was the controlling principle of the universe, together with that element in man by which this principle is perceived. Marginalia. Does God know itself with the Logos because the Logos is the mind of God? Back to the text. That element would later be called logi by the Stoics, meaning a spark or presence of the Logos in man and in all that exists. Though the Logos itself was one, yet it was inherent in everything that existed, its presence in the multiple being the logoi. According to Heraclitus and to later Stoics, man was to live in accordance with this interior logoi if he wanted to live a good and well-ordered life. Live in unity with the Logos, that is. As far as we know, Heraclitus coined the term Logos, thus what it meant to him can never be identified with any of its much later etymological definitions. In his words, quote, "It, Logos, is the power and knowledge that steers all things. The Logos knows," end quote. Quote, "There is but one wisdom to understand the knowledge by which all things are steered, piloted through all," end quote. The pilot he calls the, quote, "intelligent helmsman," end quote. Quote, "This Logos is always existent, but men fail to understand it both before they have heard of it and when they have heard of it for the first time. For although all things happen through the Logos, men seem as if they had no acquaintance with such works and words as I expound, dividing each thing according to its nature and explaining how it really is. The rest of mankind are unconscious of what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do when asleep." End quote. Quote, "When people make trial of my words, they behave as if they had no experience of the Logos by which all things come to pass."